Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host, Tom McKenna, and with me this week are Mike Pekovich.
Hey, guys.
Matt Kinney.
Hello, everyone.
Ben Strano. And behind the camera is Jeff Rose.
Hey. Hey, Jeff.
Oh, he said something. Let's go. Cool. Before we begin in earnest, I figured we had a new issue kind of arriving in people's mailboxes. Maybe talk about some highlights and some of our favorite items, articles.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike? Want to go?
Yeah, I'll go right to the back of the book, to the back cover. It's a really awesome chair by Bern Chandley from Australia, who's a great chair maker. He kind of blends kind of like the Windsor style along with sort of more kind of contemporary elements as well. It's a beautiful chair, definitely well deserving of being on the back cover. What I like about it is the fact that this is something that both John Benson and I came across independently and almost simultaneously on Instagram. And I saw that and said, oh, that'd be a great back cover. And I was about to go over to John Benson. John came over and said, Michael, do you think this would be good on the back cover? I said, yeah, John, I think it would. So that's kind of cool. So I think it kind of represents, I don't know, the new era of woodworkers, finding woodworkers, getting exposed to a lot of people around the world doing really awesome stuff. Yeah. So congratulations to Bern, well-deserved, and it's a really cool chair.
It is a beautiful chair.
It's a great back cover. How about you, Matt? What about, do you have any favorite articles, topics, furniture?
Well, I haven't seen the whole issue yet. I only get to see the parts that I work on until it's really out.
It's been out for like 2 weeks.
I've not been in the office for like 2 weeks. There's two articles in here that I worked on. One of them is by Phil Morley, also who we've also found on Instagram. Fantastic furniture maker who trained in London and came to the United States on a whim one summer to work in a camp in Maine where they had kids from Boston would come up, and he was teaching woodworking. And something really bad happened in the shop on his first day there, and so he needed a shop. They decided to give him a shop assistant who was this young woman, and he met her, and they fell in love, and they got married, and then later he came back to the United States and to live here. It's a great story. And it has nothing to do with woodworking.
And he made furniture in between.
But it's a great technique about how to glue up thin panels. It's something I'd never seen before. He uses those Veritas bench blades to apply pressure while he's taping the joints and everything. It's really cool. And then there's an article with Craig Thibodeau about inlay, using modern materials for inlay. And it's this sort of almost mother-of-pearl-like inlay banding or stringing.
And it's flexible.
It's flexible, so you can go around arcs and so forth. It's really cool, and that was a fun article to go out and shoot at Craig's place in San Diego.
Yeah, Craig does amazing work. It's really nice to be able to get his techniques into the magazine because he's so high-end. Sometimes it's very difficult to think, how can we get this into like 8 pages or whatever, this entire technique or piece of furniture.
But he's making a living doing it, which means his techniques are really sound and efficient and really smart.
Yeah, he does make a living. And one thing that's cool, you think about woodworking is, like, I think about the stuff that Craig does, and you think, oh, it's just furniture making, woodworking, but not really. What he does is like a whole nother craft. It's like this separate craft that he's an expert at in addition to making furniture.
He's making a living completely. Now he's working on a yacht, or he's got some connections to a boatyard, so he does, high-end yacht work. But it's not, I don't know if he's really building like finished furniture. I think he's sometimes doing just kind of carpentry type stuff, building cabinets for these yachts. So it's not like, his stuff, but it's kind of a cool thing. If you're in San Diego, might as well work on yachts.
Yeah. I just meant like turning is, you think turning is part, and in a way it's the broad part of woodworking, but turning is really a craft and technique unto itself, separate from traditional furniture making.
Kind of, I would put chair making in that area as well. And so what Craig does is mainly sheet goods, but it's high end veneer, marquetry, really clean work.
Yeah.
And he's getting to the really cool mechanical stuff too, like moving furniture.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's kind of out there, but
Yeah.
amazing.
He was commissioned to make some puzzle boxes. And so he had ordered some puzzle boxes from Japan and already got them in a store that sells Japanese goods in San Diego. And he had them when I was there. They were really cool. And the precision of these puzzle boxes, which reminds me, there's a guy on Instagram that, I can't think of his name right now, which doesn't help anybody, but he makes amazing puzzle boxes.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah,
That
Keegan. Keegan something or another. We'll talk about him later because it might be cool to have him in the magazine.
Cool.
Cool. Well, one of my favorite articles was Chris Becksford doing a bunch of gifts, and it kind of timed perfectly for me because my anniversary was coming up, and I figured, I have this cherry scrap block or leg, it might be fun to do something with it. So I made his little tea candle holder, and one of the things I discovered while I was doing it was how nice it is to be able to do something. Essentially it took me maybe 4 hours total. It was like half hour, 45 minutes at a time in the shop, just putting together something that was nice, basic, and finishable in like a day.
Definitely.
So that was fun. I like the other pieces in there, and they're really cool because, like I said, they're tasteful. They've got the Chris Becksford seal of approval, and they really are quick to make. So with the holidays coming up, jam on it and go out to the shop and make some of them. But I also like Mike Korzak's bookcase, which, you think of bookcase, you kind of think, square, rectangular, pretty plain, but he's got this base on there that could drive you nuts. Building, pretty complex.
Yeah, it's
A lot of
really nice.
shaping.
Definitely echoes of Garrett Hack's work, and he's influenced by Garrett, but it's a really nice combination of curly maple case. What is the base made out of? It's kind of Babinga.
Binga.
And then he added a couple drawers at the top of the bookcase as well, and that has to be Babinga as well. The drawer fronts look like they match the base to kind of tie everything together.
Yeah, I think so.
It's one of those things. It's like, oh, that's a nice bookcase, but then when you get into it, it's like it is an insanely
It's a
complex thing to make.
It's a bookcase, all right.
Oh, I forgot about the John Reed Fox Designer's Notebook.
Yeah.
Anytime John Reed Fox is in the magazine, it's a joy because homie rocks it out.
I don't think you're on a homie name basis with John Reed Fox yet.
I barely know him.
If you Google "Homie Rocks It Out," John Reed Fox comes up.
He does. Yeah.
I kind of fear what you're going to find if you Google that.
This is an amazing rap video on YouTube where John Reed Fox is rapping in his shop.
Speaking of wrapping in a shop, Chris Gochner did a really cool review of Dovetail saws, and that was a different approach to tool reviews than we typically do. Usually we publish, every tool rather that we test, and we talk about each individual one, but Chris and a bunch of students of his and woodworkers, gave a whole bunch of Dovetail saws a test ride and basically picked 7 of the favorites.
Yeah, so every saw in the review are saws that Chris would recommend for one reason or the other. And they vary in price point and feel and weight and handle size and shape, but depending on what you're looking for, they all represent either a good value or a really expensive saw that works really well, depending on what their priorities are. So, and I got to try out a lot of saws that I knew sort of only by name, only head to head, and that was really fun on different woods and a little bit eye opening. So, very cool.
Yeah, it was great that Chris was open to that because the whole idea of hand tools, but hand saws in particular, there's a lot of personal interaction that happens between the user and the saw, in terms of grip, hang, and all that stuff. And so, one person's opinion may not be the end all, when it comes to hand tools. So it was great that he got a bunch of different influence or interpretations or testing opinions of the tools.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get to the first question.
Cool.
And this one comes from Mike. And Mike says, I've heard you promote prefinishing before, and I've been doing this for more and more. But how far do you go? I'm hesitant to finish inside surfaces without doing the outside for fear of warping or cupping. Would putting one coat on the outside be a smart option?
It's not I don't think it's always necessary to do that, like for casework and stuff. I think the operative thing is to pre-finish fairly soon to when you're actually gluing everything up. I think that's a good idea. However, I did make a train table years ago for my son out of plywood, and I just got some green paint and rolled it on like one side of a 1/2-inch sheet of plywood. That's a really bad idea. It was like a mega potato chip. It's like, so there is something.
Is that when
the
the skateboard rink started in the backyard?
Yes.
Yeah, you want to pre-finish, so you pre-finish and then you assemble.
Yeah.
That's, you don't pre-finish
bang,
and
bang,
set it aside and then go do other, joinery and this and that and the other thing and, take a week off to play golf or, you finish and then you assemble it.
Yeah. And I think it depends on the piece. Are you flushing joinery after the fact? Are you planing down a frame and panel door so the frame is nice and flush? In that case, you're not finishing anything. Mm-hmm. You might pre-finish a panel. For my work, a lot of the joinery kind of sticks out, which means I'm not doing any flushing of surfaces afterwards. So I will do everything from a single coat of shellac and sand it down to single coat of shellac and sand it down, but on the inside faces, hit it with 2 or 3 more coats. So that's like done. All the way to completely finishing every single part, just about up until I'm ready to rub out and wax, but then I'll glue it up at that point. So you go from parts to glue up to finished piece of furniture. Like, boom, you're done. That's kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when anything of mine that I make, the inside gets finished completely before I glue it up. And with small boxes, it's very helpful because the shellac and I don't normally wax the inside, but I'll shellac it and the glue will just pop right off.
Right.
So I don't have to worry about squeeze out on the inside of the box. But I do that with cabinets and other things. I think, one place I would not pre-finish, but this is completely probably off topic, but is Kumiko.
I don't finish that at all.
I don't either, but people have asked me a lot about what kind of finish would I do, and I said if I do anything, I'd go get a rattle can of shellac at Home Depot
hit it, yeah.
and just spray it with the shellac after it was assembled. Yeah.
Why don't you wax the inside of a box?
Well, because if you get because the wax I use doesn't really smell bad. It smells nice. But I'm always going to have to go back there and pop that glue off. So if you're in there popping that glue off, you're just going to scratch the glue off anyways. I mean, the wax is going to come off a little bit, and then you're going to have to re-wax it. So might as well just wait to wax it.
Mm-hmm.
And smell. I mean, I've made the mistake of waxing the inside of like a wall cabinet for wine glasses. 8 years ago.
What'd you wax it with, though?
Something
Mutton
smelly.
tallow?
I don't know.
Johnson's paste wax.
It's just still smelly.
A mix of mutton tallow and tapenade.
I think so.
Well, it's funny when it comes to, I haven't really done a whole lot of pre-finishing, but I did do it on the cabinet on stand I made, and I did it on the aprons and on the lower stretchers, and I was thinking I didn't want to have to try to get finish on those small parts and with the insets and everything. I figured it would be a nightmare to do after assembly, and it was great because, the glue did pop right off.
Yeah.
So it was very helpful. So I'm kind of a big fan of pre-finishing, and we'll plan on doing it more in the future. I don't think I do enough of it. I haven't experimented enough with it. But well, let's get on to question number 2. This one comes from Steve. And Steve says, I just took a huge leap and bought a saw stop. I ordered Boscheel T9 spray as well so I could protect the cast iron. The saw arrived before the Boscheel. I got nervous and covered the cast iron with paste wax after assembly. Now the spray came, and I would like to use it to give my cast iron better long-term protection, but it's covered in wax. Do you think I could spray the Boscheel over the wax? The moisture level in my shop is not consistent, so I feel it's important to protect my investment. It's definitely a good thought, protecting the investment.
You definitely could spray it over the wax. I mean, there's
I don't know what would happen. There's
I don't
probably
know what would
solvents in the bow shield which would dissolve the wax.
That's what I would think.
I was just saying, I mean, you could do it. I don't know whether you should do it.
Oh,
But I mean, I don't know what it's going to do. But you could just take the wax off.
yeah,
Just,
that's really easy.
just
Yeah.
wipe it, get a rag and put mineral spirits on it
Yeah.
and just clean it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then spray your Bow Shield T9 on there.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't go with the CRC product, which was our best overall, not the Bow Shield.
Well, the CRC stuff is a little bit harder to find, isn't it? You got to like Bow Shield, you can get at the
Yeah.
Woodcrafts and Rocklers and places like that.
Right. Yeah, you can buy the CRC stuff on Amazon, and I think they sell it at Home Depot now.
Oh, they do?
Is that like a drying sort of stuff? It doesn't leave it
No,
greasy.
it,
A
it
dry
didn't
molly?
leave. When the
that's good.
I tested.
I was
a
in a
bunch
band
of,
once called Dry Molly.
No, that's flogging Molly. I did a tool test in 2012 on rust protection, and the that CRC stuff didn't leave a feel. Like it didn't feel, at least to me, it didn't feel like greasy or anything. Like some of those coatings, you get kind of an uncomfortable feel to it. But I think it's fine for machines. I don't use that stuff on my hand tools. I use jojoba oil on my hand tools.
Jojoba.
I think it's pronounced jojoba.
Jojoba? Jojoba.
Same as camellia oil. It's a vegetable-based oil.
Yeah. And it didn't do as well in the overall rust test, but we were pretty extreme in what we were putting the steel through. But again,
Yeah,
it's kind of, it doesn't stink when you spray it on, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel bad, at least
But
to
it
me.
does turn solid at about 50 degrees.
Jojoba.
Oh, does it?
Yeah,
Jojoba.
jojoba. Yeah, it does. I know that from experience. Yeah, it freezes or it turns, but so does like olive oil.
In Crisco. I use Crisco.
Use Crisco. That's what they do in the deep south. But actually, I just said Woodcrafts and Rocklers, and I hate it. You never know sports announcers, they'll say like your Tom Brady's and your Drew Breeses, and it's like, no, there's only one Tom Brady. You don't put it. I hate that when they do that. I just did it.
What do you use? On your machines.
He uses your jojoba oils,
I use your jojoba oils and your vegetable oils.
your WD-40s.
These W-
Yeah, sometimes products should come with pronunciation guides, on them somewhere.
Some of the spray stuff, it protects, but even better, it just kind of makes
kind of a
the
lubricant.
surfaces a little slipperier, like on your joiner.
Yep, on your joiners.
Yeah, that's what.
You got your joiners and your table saws.
I actually, here's the one thing I love. One thing I love about my table saw and my joiner. Both of them are old. Both of them have patina. Neither one of them rusts ever.
Yeah.
So I don't put anything on them. I may occasionally wax them, but not very often. My bandsaw, which is a new bandsaw, will rust if I'm not careful. What it'll rust is like it's cool in my garage, and then I open up the garage door, and instantly there's that change in temperature, so
Right.
you get all that condensation. If I'm not careful, it'll rust in like 2 minutes. It'll be just a film of rust over it. So that one I put. Sometimes I'll put waxy lit on it, which is that stuff that Michael Fortune really likes. It's made to. They spray machines with it in industrial settings to make them more slippery.
And he uses that as a glue resist.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He puts that down before he glues things up, and the glue just comes right up off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned the hard way about rust when I had it actually changed where I had my shop. I had stuff out in the garage, and after I moved in, I just put some moving blankets over my table saw, and didn't go out there for a couple of weeks. And when I did, I pulled the blanket off, and half of the saw table had flash rust on it from just that short period of time. So I was like, well, this isn't going to work out. So I moved everything inside.
Time for a tool test.
Time for a tool test. I don't know if that spurred it, but it's quickly how fast rust happens.
Yeah.
I mean, my basement it's a basement, but I have a dehumidifier. I've got desiccants, and I don't really have much of an issue. Occasionally I'll see little pieces or areas rather of flash rust on my table saw, but
There's
it's
our
not
next
a big
sticker.
deal.
Rust happens.
Rust happens.
1-800-EAT-RUST. Put that on your car.
Before I had my shop insulated and I had rust issues, I found that I just cut a piece of 1/4-inch plywood or a piece of MDF or something the size of the tabletop and just throw that on there, and it keeps the rust off 100%.
I just buy a new table saw every time on rust, yeah.
Just grind down the top 1/16 of an inch.
I just put the old one out in the yard.
Put it through the planer.
Put it out in the woods behind the house.
Next to your old toilets that you use as planters.
Yes.
The farm truck. The old Cadillac.
Yeah, a couple of couches are out there. It's going to be a nice outdoor living space pretty soon.
Get a fire pit.
A few refrigerators.
Quite romantic. All right. Well, let's get to. Do we answer this question? Yeah, I think we did. It's time for our all-time favorite jig of all time for this week. Do you want to hit us off, Matt?
Sure. So mine is one I've been using a lot recently, although I've had it for a long time. I think that Ben has a picture of it to put up, don't you?
I don't think you sent me one.
Well, I sent you like 4. Remember you said the picture got really big on your screen and you thought it was mesmerizing?
Oh, you did. Oh, my goodness.
I did, yeah.
He was really mesmerized.
Yeah.
That's on me.
Yeah.
That's
so, anyways, it's a jig I use to do miters on really small box sides and also on anything else that's really small that needs a miter. So sometimes I'll use it. There's a box I make, an ebony box I make where I cut the lid off the body and then I rabbet the bottom of the lid and the top of the box. And I go back and I glue in these tiny little mitered strips into the rabbet in the top and it fits over the bottom right. Anyways. You can read about it in my forthcoming book, which comes out next year. But so it's this awesome little jig. Look, there it is. So it fits in my vise, and it angles back, and it's just 2 pieces of maple fit into it's attached to a piece of plywood, and it's all mitered. And I do have a clamp on it when I'm doing box sides. I clamp the box side down and just form the complete miter starting from a square edge. And but I also use it with a chisel to do if I need miters on a tiny little piece of like the spacers between boxes. When I make these stacked boxes, those get mitered at the corners, and they're like a 1/4 inch thick by a 1/2 inch wide. And I'll miter those with a chisel using that. And I've been using it a lot recently, and I really love it. I'll use it to make mitered liners that fit inside boxes, and it's just a very handy thing to have because miters on small things are very difficult. You cannot, like some of the boxes I make, they'll have ends that are only 1 3/4 inches long and 1 1/4 inches tall or something, and you really shouldn't be doing that on the table saw because you can't even get a clamp in there.
Right.
Use a radial arm saw.
You should use a radial arm saw with a dado set on it, or maybe a rabbiting bit in it.
A lawyer just walked by.
It is frightening what people use radial arm saws for. But you can put it in there and very quickly form an accurate and clean miter. That's what I really like about forming miters with hand tools, is that the surface you get from them is better than the surface I get from my table saw.
Sure.
And so they glue up to be tighter joints.
So you don't have an end stop on this?
Not built in, no. And I don't really use it because when I am making something like if I'm doing little trim pieces that go around something, you're just marking with a pencil line there, and then you can pair it and test the fit. When I'm doing box sides, I cut those to length.
You cut them length square, and then you just pair right up to that corner.
Right up to the corner, and then you stop, and it doesn't take any length off. So, although I know in the past I have used a stop on it, but I found that it's just as easy to, if you have it everything the right length, you just pair until you get to that the point of the miter, and then you stop.
Cool.
and everything ends up being the same length. It's amazing how I do that a lot, where I cut something to length and then I do the joinery on it, like even with Kumiko, I do that a lot. But anyways.
Cool.
How about you, Mike? Jig?
Yeah, this jig it's not a specific jig. It's more a jig concept.
Oh, goodness.
Another concept.
So
It's like a band of jigs, maybe.
So my all-time favorite jig is the type of jig you make to solve a specific problem that would be really difficult to just kind of do. And one example of that is I had made a little case that sat on a base, and the base had splayed, tapered legs that sort of notched into little rails front and back. So it's like, how do you do that? How do you, like, conceptually, I got a tapered leg, and I just need to tack it on to this rail at an angle. How do I go about doing that? And so I thought, well, you need to do something kind of weird in order to make it easy. And so once I figured out the geometry of what I wanted to do, then I just sort of figured out, okay, how do I do this sort of double haunched bridle joint thing? And, well, I could do it this way. I could do it like this, and that would work. So then you put together this jig, and it works, and it does this job really well and really accurately. And then you're like, done.
That was a cool jig.
Is there a picture of the jig or just the legs and the joints?
It's not about the jig.
It's about the concept.
It's a jig that you put together on the spot to solve a problem at hand.
And it's the only thing it's good for.
And
Is
that's
that
all
one
it's
thing.
good for.
Yeah.
Yes.
You pitch it after if you're not going to build it again.
Yeah. So it's the mindset. It's the jig mindset, the engineering of a jig to solve a problem, which to me is really fun. It's a really fun part of woodworking. I really enjoy that problem solving. And then when you nail it and it actually works the way it's supposed to work, that was really cool.
Yeah, and you have fingers intact and no kickback or whatever.
So,
But as an example,
yes.
here's the particular jig that you were just talking about. We don't get to see that?
I couldn't find a picture of it.
Oh my! What? Oh my! Give me a break! Oh, I don't buy that. I'm not sure I'm buying that. Okay. We need to have one time like a nice 10-minute conversation about the difference between a jig and a fixture.
Yes.
And then also talk about why some people call a sled a boat and why it's unacceptable.
I agree with that last statement.
Yes. A cross-cut boat.
Oh,
All right.
wow. Well, it's funny. When I was thinking about this, I was like, well, I've got, a saw hook. I've got a miter shooting board. But I was trying to think of something I use really a lot, and it came down to bench horses. I use these things all the time for, glue ups, and they're just simple 3/4 inch MDF, T-shaped things that I put on my bench. I've got 3 of them. I use them to support pieces for finishing. I've got some nail holes drilled in the upright portion of it, and I just stick brads in there with the point up, and I can rest pieces on top there while I finish. And I wound up, it's funny, going back to what Mike was talking about before, the concept. I was making the candle holders, the tea holders for the little project I was building. I'm drilling a big hole in basically a 2-inch block or 2-inch square. And I was like, well, how am I going to hold that? Bexford had a whole dedicated jig on his drill press table with a right angle fence that was all screwed down. And I think he had, I don't know if he had a Destaco clamp, but he had some other things to hold the piece. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I used these fences on either side of the block and clamped it to my drill press fence, and it held it in place for the drilling. And all I had to do was kind of hold it at the front against the back of the fence. And I've got a video of it I can have Ben post online afterward. Cool. But those things rock, and they're easy to make, and they're so helpful. I use them all the time.
So I just want to point out that when I suggested let's do our favorite all-time jig of the week on the podcast today, I thought that all 3 of us would actually show a jig, as I was the only one who actually shows a jig.
I sent Ben photos.
They're up there. That's a fixture.
That's a jig.
It's neither a jig nor a fixture. It's a sawhorse.
It's a jig. A sawhorse is a jig. It's a tool.
Okay. It's a tool. Okay.
It's a jig.
Well, here's my favorite all-time jig. It's a chisel. It's just like, oh goodness,
Well, it's the first time around.
Mike.
It's a jig.
You know what a jig is.
Okay, fine. A hinge mortising jig.
Oh goodness. All right.
We done?
I think we're done. Let's move on.
This is a long one. This is from Will. And Will says, I'm planning to build the not-so-big workbench. The cut list indicates lumber that has been milled to finished dimensions. When going to the lumber yard, how much oversized do I need to buy the lumber? For example, the top is made of 2-inch thick by 3 and 2 3/4 inch wide by about 60 inches long. In order to have that board that is milled to a finished thickness of 2 inches, do I need to start with a 12-quarter rough sawn board? In general, how thick should rough sawn boards be when planning for finished milled dimension lumber? Wow. There's two layers to this question.
You know, I called Ed Pernick, who made that bench,
Yes.
and asked him this question.
Is it a jig or a fixture?
And he said, "Jojo bolo." That's all he said.
That's old school there.
I know the answer to this question. Can I give it?
Yeah, that would be nice.
You do not need to buy 12-quarter stock. You buy 8-quarter stock, and then you rip out strips that are, rough. Let's say finished 2 inches thick. So you rip them out at 2.5. You join them, and then you plane them down to 2 inches wide, and you turn them on edge, and the width becomes the thickness of the bench.
And why do you turn them on edge?
Usually because that, in most cases, because you're going to buy a big flat sawn board, and it turns that into a quarter sawn board. So if there's any movement, it will be across the width and not in the thickness, right? So
It'll be more in the thickness, which is a much smaller dimension than the width.
Yes.
It makes it more stable.
makes it more stable, yeah.
So, and less prone to cupping.
Right, the whole
Yeah.
bench top cupping up.
Yep.
Yeah. That was it. I mean, that's the answer.
Well, he had another question about how
Oh, he did?
thick should rough swords be, like a general question. How thick should rough sawn boards be when planning for finished milled dimension lumber?
Well, I think that depends on the length of the part. If you need something that's 8 feet long and you need to finish it off straight and at 2 inches thick, then you're going to have to probably start with something kind of thick, because the possibility of cupping or bowing is more significant with something that's 8 feet long as opposed to something that's 2 feet long.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah.
Unless you're in the fine woodworking shop.
where nothing ever cups or bows. So I think it depends on the part that you're aiming to get out of it. But I would. That's the question I think more about when I'm going to resaw than when I'm going to, it's like if I need a 3/4 part, you could probably start with 4/4.
Yeah, I mean 3/4 to 7/8 for you can usually get out of rough sawn 4/4.
Yep.
But like you said, for like a 6-foot tabletop where those boards are going to be longer, you're pushing to get 3/4 of an inch thick across a 6-foot length for the most part. So
Yeah.
I would probably start with like 5/4 stock if I wanted something close to an inch. So I was sort of work back. If I want 7/8 of an inch, yeah, I can start with 4/4. If I want an even inch, you got to start with 5/4. So like a lot of arts and crafts stuff just looks better at heavier dimensions for casework. So I'll tend to always start with 5/4 stock to give me a good, healthy inch thick for case sides. And the same thing for 8/4 stock. I'll expect to. You can sometimes squeeze out 1 7/8 if you're really lucky. Chances are you're looking at 1 3/4 finished stock out of a rough 8/4 board.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is Garrett Hack told me, he said, I spend a lot of time looking for boards that are straight. So he said, I don't buy boards that are cupped or bowed or anything like that, because if they're that way now, they're going to be that way after you mill them.
Because he doesn't buy his lumber, he grows it.
I know, yeah.
But what doesn't work goes in the fire pile.
Right. But he's, and then, which is a good
No, it's a
point.
good
It's like,
point, yeah.
you should try to buy stuff that's as flat and as you can find. Then it becomes less of an issue. But Mike's take on that is, I think I agree with, is that, 8/4, for example, it's hard to get 1 7/8 out of usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But resawing, that's a real issue with resawing, but we're not going to address it right now. I'm just kidding.
Next episode.
Next episode. We'll have to wait for someone to send that question in.
What's the question so someone can send it in?
When you're resawing, how over thick do you need to cut it in order to end up at, say, a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch? Or if I want 2 1/2 inch parts, how thick do I need to start off my material with?
Yeah.
1/2 inch.
Are you
probably
asking that right now?
6/4. No, I know the answer.
Because there's a lot of questions in front of you. So email it into shoptalk@taunton.com and get in line.
Look at Ben cutting us off.
No, I wasn't.
Keeping us on track.
I wasn't asking that question. I said it's a good question though.
I was joking.
Get a load of big old Ben.
Yeah.
Putting the hammer down.
All right, let's move on. Ben says we got to move on to the
Ben
next
Hammer
question.
Strano. Okay. Let's move on. This one comes from Amy. And Amy says, what does clean, accurate joinery really look like? Sometimes it seems that you spend 98% of your time in the shop on setup in order to make sure that every joint is absolutely perfect. This is a deep dive.
Yeah.
You want to get us started, Mike? Mike.
So the question is
How perfect is
what's-
perfect?
What's good enough? Like, what are you shooting
Yeah.
for? And I think it's a moving target depending on what you're doing. Sometimes, so the question alludes to setup, which to me kind of says machine work. And I think there's kind of two ways to go about it. For machine work, I'm of kind of the opinion where if I'm setting something up on a table saw to some joinery tenons or something like that, I want them to be really, really, really close off the saw. Because if you're setting this whole thing up and you still have a 1/16 of an inch to hit with the shoulder plane once you're done,
Yeah.
What's the point?
what are you doing?
Yeah.
That said, there tends to be a little bit of variance. So when I'm setting up for machinery, I'll tend, like for tenons, I'll get something that maybe just starts, but it's a little heavy, but it can start. So it means it's really close to fitting. But and then from there, then you get out the shoulder plane and it's one pass fits, or one pass on one side, one pass on the other fits. So then you kind of
Yeah.
get this routine of fitting, and things go pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, the setup can take time, but in the end, the payoff is huge.
Right.
I always get it really get the tenon really close, like it starts to fit in. I'm like, I'll hit that with a shoulder plane later, and then I just hit it with a mallet. Just jam it, just shove it.
Well, sometimes I think if you wait overnight, I think there must be some moisture loss in the boards or something. I'll find something is overly tight. You come back the next day expecting to do a lot of fitting. All of a sudden, everything is kind of going together.
Yeah.
And then as far as handwork joinery is concerned, so for machine work, it's all about setup. You're getting everything set up with test boards so that once it's set up, you can batch out a whole bunch of things without doing anything else. For handwork, it's always layout. It's the stress is, cutting dovetails with a handsaw. Now that's easy. It's going to take you about 5 minutes to get comfortable with your handsaw. But if the layout line you're cutting to is not in the right place, you can cut perfect lines and still have a huge headache when you're done with that. So for me, layout is key. And like, for instance, if I'm cutting through tenons or dovetails, I spend a lot of time on the layout with the expectation that if I hit my lines, the joint is going to be really, really close to fitting if it doesn't fit perfectly right there. And it's not this big thing where, oh yeah, it fits right off the saw. It's some kind of parlor trick. It's like, no. The closer it fits off the saw, the less work you have to do, and the less likely you're going to introduce gaps into that joint through fitting it. So, setup is key. Spend as much time as you need, as many test pieces as you need to get it right before you start making cuts. And for handwork, really spend the time to make sure your layout is accurate before you pick up a hand tool.
Yeah, I think I'll answer this question in a slightly different way, because this is something I've learned in making all these boxes and stuff. I'm going to answer a different part of our question. What does accurate joinery look like? One, it doesn't have gaps, right? So shoulders close up without gaps. Miter joints come together without gaps. So if your dovetails come together without gaps, so that's what accurate joinery looks like. But I've found that I can make a box and it looks square and the miter joints are tight, but it's not square. And you will never know that it's not square. And it's completely irrelevant that it's not perfectly square because it looks square. And when I fit the lid or whatever, the lid has a uniform gap around all four sides. And so your eye just doesn't pick up on the fact that it's slightly out of square. And it's it's sort of irrelevant. So I guess if I was, I'm really looking for when I'm doing joinery is that there's no gaps, because you can make dovetails and the dovetail angle, the slope of the tails could vary slightly from tail to tail.
Sure.
But as long as the pins fit in tightly, it doesn't matter. No one's really going to register that.
Right.
So I think that's the most important thing when you're making a joint is that you want it to close up tightly. I mean, that's not. I mean, you could have a mortise and tenon joint that closes up really tightly, but where the tenon is a 1/4 inch too thin for the mortise, that's not good. That's really not good.
It's a really good butt joint.
Yeah, but an accurate joint is going to close up tightly. I think that's what you look for. If it's not closing up tightly, then there's something wrong with your joint.
Right. And even to your point, even more specifically, it closes up tightly on the show face.
Exactly. Yes. That was going to be one, my riff on it was in terms of like how perfect is perfect. And my perspective is I try to cut the joinery as best I can without gaps and that it closes up. But I do focus less on aesthetics when something is not visible. Mm-hmm. So, I'm worried less about tear out on an interior partition or something like that, or inside of a drawer pocket or things like that. So anything that's not visible, I go for a good fit, but if it doesn't look great and works, I'm kind of okay with that as long as the outside shell and everything looks really, really good.
Right.
I mean, or as good as I can make it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in terms of how perfect is perfect, I think what I just said is how I approach it when I make stuff. And a lot of the things that I make are small, where imperfections are more noticeable, So if you're building a house and the window casing is an 1/8 inch out of square, that's not a big deal.
Notice it, yeah.
But if I'm making a tiny little box and it's an 1/8 inch out of square, it's fairly noticeable, right? Or if a divider is an 1/8 inch off, then that's noticeable. So what I try to do is I try to make things as accurately as I can. When I set up my table saw to cut miters, I make sure that the blade is really at 45 degrees. I make several test cuts, test it with my combo square. I make sure that when I make my sleds to cut miters that they're accurate. I make sure that my table saw is set up that when I tilt the blade is still parallel to the table and things like that. And then once I know I make it as accurately as I can, it works out that it's perfect enough.
Yeah, the tools are accurate, the cuts are going to be accurate.
Right. And so things are not going to be so wildly inaccurate that they aren't passable.
Yeah.
Because, I'll tell you a lot of the stuff that I make, it's not perfect. There's problems with it. But when people see it, no one ever notices them.
Until you point it out.
Isn't that a fault of woodworkers?
Matt had made this beautiful Kumiko panel working on a new design. It was like fantastic. And he brought it into the office and showing it to me. And the thing is beautiful. And Matt's going, yeah, but look right there. Can you tell that's off? I said, no, I can't. And you need to not say that.
You know, one of the other aspects that I think is really revolutionary that I learned, years ago was being willing to throw something out, as opposed to, like, if you've got a joint that's not working together and there's small parts, sometimes it's just easier to start over again. For, like, even if it's a dovetail that you're finding it's too gappy, just start again, try it again, instead of trying to stick wedges or anything that's going to be visible. I've made many cabinets where I've stuck kind of filler strips into gaps, and I look at them today and I'm horrified by it. So I think you should have kind of a willingness to start over again, or at least maybe practice a lot more before you work on the real thing.
Here's a theory that I'm working with now, and I've kind of learned this from Instagram. But we've joked about it. Sometimes we joke about this at the around each other. We'll say something that is JPEG pretty. In which, in other words, it means that thing looks fantastic in a photo, but I saw it in person and it's not as nice, but it's JPEG pretty. And I think that when people look at the things you make, you have to think about them. I think they don't pick up, like, when I look at something I made, I see it in HD, right? I see it in high definition,
Yes.
1020p, everything stands out. But when someone else sees it, they see it as a JPEG. And so they miss all of those little imperfections, or they see it maybe not as a JPEG is because one way to say it, but in other words, is they see it holistically.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas when we see it, we're picking out little parts of it and seeing it. But so I've started to now look at my stuff after taking pictures of it. And then I go, well, actually, that doesn't look so bad. I don't really see it. Like the panel that I brought in and showed you, I'm looking at the photos of it that I put on Instagram, and I'm like, actually, that looks really good, And I'm just going to let everyone think that it's really good. But it's something sort of the way I kind of look at it now is I think people, when they see the stuff that you made, they're looking at it like it's a JPEG, and you're looking at it like it's HD.
Yeah.
Right. And they also, I think people who don't do this have a view of amazement that you actually made something sometimes. And so that aspect, I think, maybe overshadows the design, where someone really would like something I made, but I'm like, I should have made the sides thinner or the top wider or something like that. I always think of what the next iteration would be, or what I would have changed if I, had the time or the desire.
Something I tell students all the time is we'll be in class and they'll say, God, look at, I messed this up. And a lot of these people never have touched tools before. And they get really caught up. And I said, you did that wrong. And they'll be like, yeah. And I'll go, but look at everything you did right. And then it kind of like changes their perspective on it, because you might have got that there might be a gap in that one little miter joint, but everything else about what you just made is perfect. So focus on that.
My approach to teaching is very similar, but if someone's really happy with what they've done, I tend to point out what was wrong.
And crush their soul.
Yeah, no, this is not true.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to the last question. This one is from Scott. And Scott says, do you have any suggestions for getting a burr on curved scrapers?
Yeah, if you're talking like those gooseneck scrapers, which we all have, you get in the two-pack, you get the square and then the gooseneck, and everyone, for some reason, I have my gooseneck scraper from probably literally 30-plus years ago. They're hard, but the concept is basically the same in that you want to basically file and polish an edge square to the faces of it. On a flat scraper, it's really easy. It's a little bit more challenging. I tend to like to use, for regular card scrapers, I have a block with a bandsaw kerf in it. You put it in, it keeps everything nice and square. You can't really do that with a curve, but you can use the same concept where get a block on your fairly coarse, diamond plate or sandpaper, and just rest the curved scraper up against the block as you're working on that edge, just to keep it as square as possible. Same thing with your polishing. because the whole thing is the more square that edge is, the kind of the sharper the corners are and the less rounded they are, the easier it is to then turn a hook with your burnisher. And even then I find that along the changing curve of a gooseneck scraper, some areas will just be sharper, have a better hook than other areas. And for the most part, if I'm working on an inside curve, you have a little bit of leeway in terms of the radius of the scraper you're working with, where you can just kind of fudge the scraper until you find a area that's just cutting well.
Yeah, change the angle too.
Yeah.
Angle of attack.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't use it enough to have perfected it, and even if I did use them all the time, I doubt that I would always be perfect.
Yeah, when I've done them, I've just tried to focus on, like, I first find the section that fits the molding or whatever best, and then I just focus on that one section and just sharpen that. And I found that because you're not, it's a smaller area, smaller length of edge that you're trying to turn a burr on and all that it's a little bit easier to turn a hook and everything on it. And then I just get out sandpaper and sand whatever it was I was trying to scrape.
Wrap the scraper in sandpaper and use that to sand.
Was it when I was making the shaker cupboard that I made for the magazine? I bought these molding planes. I found these nice wooden molding planes somewhere up in Maine, I think at Liberty Tool. And I bought them and I sharpened them, and I was going to use them to, refine this thing. And I was working with maple, and it just wasn't going well. So I just took the blades out and wrapped sandpaper around the bottom of the molding planes and just sanded them.
That's a really good idea.
That did not make it into the article. Yes. But I did.
It just did.
But I did put it on Instagram though. So that was many years ago though. Now that was like in 2015 probably. Wow,
Long time ago.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Don't forget to head over to tauntonstore.com and use the discount code SHOPTALK to get 20% off your purchase. And while you're on our site, click on over to finewoodworking.com/sweeps to enter for your chance to win our hand tool giveaway featuring $1,000 worth of hand tools from Lee Valley Veritas. That's awesome.
It also comes with a 1-week stay or visit from Vic Teslin.
Better load up your fridge.
He likes his poutine.
Please spread the word about Shop Talk Live to your woodworking friends and neighbors. Shop Talk Live is dependent on your questions, so make sure to send them in to shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button. Finally, you can keep up with Fine Woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook, and look for all of us on Instagram as well. Thanks for listening, and have fun in the shop. That's a wrap.
We're done.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that a jig or a fixture that Alan's using?
That's a boat. Why did people call it a crosscut boat?
Why does it bother you?
There's only one place where they call it a boat.
North Bennett.
North Bennett Street School. Yeah. We need to ask Matt Way to